Hello, everybody. I figured I would jump on the mic today because I noticed myself misdirecting my energy in the current events that's going on right now in foreign policy. As you all know, foreign policy really is my pet issue. I am very much anti-war and against the aggressions that are happening in the Middle East right now. And I think I just want to be clear outright that I'm certainly not on the side of the terrible regimes that we are planning on attacking, but I think we have to be honest about the cause and effect that our policies have and that we are creating our own problems. And I hope today to be able to inform you on this subject and give you the context in sort of a primer on the checks against each power there in the Middle East and these sort of proxy wars that have been going on for generations, really. I don't really want to waste too much time because I really do have my thoughts sort of consumed by all of this, so let me just get it all out there. I think it would be appropriate to start the story in 1953 when there was an issue with the UK. The UK and British Petroleum controlled a large share of the oil coming out of Iran, and the Mossadegh regime wanted to do something that I probably would find against my principles as a free market sort of Austrian type, and they wanted to nationalize the oil fields there in Iran. So, as a hedge against the Mossadegh regime, America and the UK staged a coup d'etat and installed the Shah, which later had developed into what we know Iran as today, which is, quasi-theocratic with a weak parliament kind of system. And it's really not optimal for what we would compare to Western-style democracy and republic, whatever you want to call it. But, a brutal state nonetheless. And over the years, we've had to check their power many times in the Middle East, and that's a huge part of what's going on here today in Syria. So there's sort of the context a little bit for you. There's a lot missing between there, but I don't think it's crucial for the points that I'm going to be trying to make. So let's go to Iraq now. Following 9/11, which Iraq had nothing to do with, we still, have people who make some sort of loose connection in this nexus of power there because Saddam was a Sunni and Al-Qaeda was a Sunni radical group. So ipso facto, that means that Saddam is guilty too. However, if we are to look at things in the context of, hey, let's say that because there are Irish Catholics in Ireland, in the IRA, blowing up cars, that means that the Holy Roman Church is involved and is aiding and abetting these people just because guilt by association, 1 + 1 = 2. That's why you got to go and get a hold of those Catholics, right? So anyway, it's the same sort of thing, really. It's a really good analogy in my opinion. So what we did in 9/11 when we kind of barely went into Afghanistan, it's a whole other topic of conversation that I think I've gotten into a little bit before in some of my episodes. But anyway, it was almost like they weren't really all that concerned about getting into Afghanistan, where they knew AQ was at the time. And actually, by the time they invaded, the Marines had kind of already let AQ into Pakistan for them to get their sort of safe refuge that they got there. But we went right to Iraq. I think even Tony Blair at the time was lamenting that, hey, guys, I mean, yeah, we can go and get Iraq too, but we got to go to Afghanistan first, right? So anyway, we went into Iraq. That happened. Now, Saddam is a pretty brutal guy. He was the leader of the Ba'athist Party, which is sort of loosely affiliated with fascism, actually directly related to fascism, more loosely related to Nazism even, I've heard. So it's a pretty terrible ideology, probably very much against what I would consider to be anything close to acceptable ethics for a state to follow. But such is the way of states. That's just my sort of cynical opinion. I don't think that governments are great, and I think the larger markets get, the less powerful a lot of governments can get. Unfortunately, and tangentially on that point, the revenue generated by a market, unfortunately, does provide the ability for that state to grow in a way. So sort of self-defeating logic that I just exposed myself to there. But anyway, I think the more powerful market gets, though, as far as when those two are at odds and the market can outpace governments, that's great. But yeah, unfortunately, pretty much all state actors, in my opinion, are totally unaccountable, and their first reaction is always to violence, and there's no reason why they wouldn't, given the circumstances. They have a monopoly on violence, so of course that's going to be their first measure of response in any sort of situation. So we overthrow this pretty terrible guy. I mean, he's treated the Kurds and Shiites pretty terrible in Kurdistan and Shiistan there. And so, yeah, I mean, a lot of my opinions on a lot of this comes down to there's really no good guy, and we shouldn't be picking winners and losers there. These people are more likely to come to some sort of lesser degree of escalations, I would say. I don't think the Middle East is going to be at peace anytime soon, but I do think that we only exacerbate a problem that's already there, and problems that we are sort of responsible for in the policies that we've carried out. So those lines get very blurry with a lot of people, especially when you just, they suggest that, even if we weren't there, there would be radical Islam. And yeah, they're right. I mean, radical Islam's been around for thousands of years, but it's only for some reason been such a huge issue in other countries when we've made ourselves targets to these people and basically encouraged them to be radicalized. So I'm not really too sympathetic to those sort of points that, we can just bomb the shit out of them because they are going to be bad anyway, so we might as well just help out our political and financial interests there in the Middle East. Not quite something that I'm thrilled about. I keep getting off on tangents, but I think a lot of this is really great information that needs to be included in this. So anyway, we check this Sunni radical group because let's just assume that they were somehow right about AQ being linked to Saddam, which is totally fraudulent. They hated each other, and Saddam kept AQ out of Iraq. But let's assume that it's right. Our solution is to check their influence in the region, which will and did eventually end up benefiting Iran. We literally installed the Dawa Party, which is the Supreme Islamic Council in Iraq. It is a Iranian political group. So we won the war in Iraq for Iran. So now what does this do? This emboldens that power axis, right? And Iran is actually allied with Syria, and mixed in with this, and the part that I've been dancing around a lot, is Russia. And this is the reason why it's been so important for me to sort of get out there and talk to people about this issue, just because it's so important to include the fact that there are nuclear weapons involved in this, and that, I hate to be alarmist, but could be a consequence of escalating tensions. Now, I might be getting a little ahead of myself here, because it's very possible that what will end up happening is just like last time, where Putin may show restraint like he did last time, and with the occasion where a lot of Russian mercenaries were killed. But that is all we really have to bank on right now, is Moscow sort of exercising restraint, because NATO is sort of on its toes here, just waiting, jumping at a chance to do something about that. So yeah, unfortunately, if Russia were somehow threatened in their own homeland, I think that this could get really dangerous, and they do perceive it as a threat. Their ambassador to the U.S. just came out and said that they feel threatened by the actions that have been taken. So the goal here, going back to just where all this started, the war on terror, there was a general named Wesley Clark, and he made media appearances detailing his experience in the State Department and seeing the memos that were flying around that their entire goals this entire time was related to checking the power of all of these different groups in all of these different countries. And there were 7 countries that they had on the list to overthrow: Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Somalia, and I forget the last one. I can't quite remember, but anyway, yeah, all of these countries were on this list. And what do we know? I mean, Libya was overthrown, and now there's open market slave trades of West Africans. In 2018, America brought back slavery in Africa. So, or at least a region of Africa that hadn't had human trafficking problems for a while, because for as bad as Muammar Gaddafi was too, and again, I mean, I can't stress this enough, these are bad people that have nothing to do with any ideology that I would consider anywhere near acceptable. So please don't come at me trying to say that I'm aligned with radical dictators that are horrible people. That's not the case. My case is that we are simply emboldening these people and making it worse. I mean, seriously, Saddam was Reagan's golden boy. Part of the whole rhetoric against Saddam was using evidence that he used gas, like I mentioned earlier, on his own people when he was a friend of the United States, and that we were using him to check, like I said, Iranian power in the region. So we can't have it both ways. We can't use these people as our rabid dog on a leash one day, and then after things are sort of quasi-stabilized in their region, because for all their faults, there is a sort of like power dynamic in these places. It's the worst. It's the best of a lot of really terrible situations. And unfortunately, when we overthrow these dictators, another power vacuum just comes in, and even worse people take power. We saw this with no better example than in Sunnistan with Iraq, where ISIS was able to come to some sort of power and clout within the region. And we actually had to leave Iraq because they wouldn't let us be there anymore. We had killed too many civilians, and we had to live by the sunset of the engagement there because they just did not want us there anymore. And it was on Bush's terms, so you can't even blame Obama. Not that I'm necessarily too, in the interest of defending Barack Obama, but just in, the matter of fact of things, this is important to understand that the sunset that we got out of Iraq with was the timeline that was initially set. And Obama tried to extend it, in fact. He tried to do the opposite of what people say. So, yeah, it sort of pokes a hole in the whole, like, Obama's a secret Muslim who's trying to instill, crazy jihadism in the world. If only that were the case, maybe he wouldn't have killed so many people in the Middle East. I don't know if he was a Muslim too. If he was a Muslim too, then, yeah, maybe he wouldn't have killed so many people. Not that they're all too friendly to each other in these sectarian conflicts or anything. Anyway, I can't get on too many tangents here. So yeah, I mean, So you can see the sort of balance of power that's building here. And it's sort of, if we go back to what General Wesley Clark said, it's sort of a shock. It's sort of like, where does this end, you know? I mean, you keep just knocking down both power axes until what? You know? Like, you're just going to have to keep checking balances of power for hundreds of years? Keep bombing these people back into the Stone Age? I mean, it's bad enough that markets are hampered by just the unnecessary aggression that's in the market, but, you know, then we have literal wholesale slaughter of people and property. I mean, these are the worst things that we can imagine a government doing, in my opinion. So, yeah, it's just not right. Let me get to some specific things here. So part of what's going on right now is there's an allegation of chemical attacks in Duma. Now, I have to say I'm rather skeptical of this evidence that I'm seeing, this open source evidence that we have. And people keep invoking, well, our leaders wouldn't be doing things that, you know, is untrue. Obviously, France and the UK are getting involved in this, so it's got to be true, right? Well, let me tell you, folks, we thought that we had things all figured out with Saddam. He had yellow cake. He had a roving chemical weapons lab that constantly went around Iraq. He was constantly on the move so that nobody could find him. And all of these claims, obviously, you know, years and years later, turned out to be completely false. We know this now. There's no denying it. There were no weapons of mass destruction that we didn't already know about. The ones that we did know about were stored in weapons lockers that were more dangerous to move than just to leave there. In fact, we know quite a lot about a lot of soldiers who got sick from getting other materials out of the same sort of storage areas. So even going around these chemical weapons can cause major health problems for people. So yeah, it's going to cause more problems just to try to eradicate the weapons. You just leave them there, and I don't know. We had known about those for a long time. They weren't new, but of course, the New York Times trots that out as justification for initially going into Iraq. So this is the propaganda stuff that we're up against, and I feel like I'm pushing a boulder up the hill, just trying to hold it back. So, all right, I'm struggling to stay on task here, but let's focus on the chemical attacks in Syria, shall we? 2013, we had alleged chemical attacks where Obama invoked a red line, as it were. And even James Clapper came out and said that this is, quote, no slam dunk, referring to the evidence on Iraq, where I think one of Bush's cabinet members said that the evidence against Saddam was a slam dunk, so to speak. So, hearkening back to that, he was like, "Hey, you don't want your own Iraq. You don't want a situation like that." So anyway, that attack, it ends up being the truth that actually Syrian rebels were using chemical weapons, and they were never actually using them. The Assad government was never actually using them against anyone in the 2013 attack, and it actually ended up being that the rebels themselves were using chemical weapons against the soldiers. The Syrian National Army, sort of legitimate government soldiers. So yeah, not only is that the case, but really when we just offhand just believe that propaganda coming out of the Middle East, think about who benefits from that. If these allegations against the Assad government aren't true, then it stands to reason that someone's benefiting. Who else other than his enemies, the multitude of jihadist groups who are actually warring against each other as well? It's a very strange assortment of powers fighting each other in Syria. It's a war theater that we really have to pay attention to, and unfortunately, people are just snookered by the word chemical weapons. And I can see why they're terrible. But let's not lose perspective here. The ballistic missiles have killed a lot more people, and with a lot less precision than we're being told. In the intercept, they have exposed up to 90% collateral damage rates. That's 90% of targets that are people who are killed by drone strikes who are not of the intended targets. So, I mean, this is brutal stuff that's happening over there. This is what's radicalizing these people, too. I mean, this is like a paradoxical thing. The more we bomb, the worse that it gets. Even, who was it? McChrystal, I believe, had said that there is such a thing as insurgent math. For every one terrorist you kill, you create a dozen or something of that effect. So these aren't just the fantasies of an anti-war activist here. These are truths that even these people within the military and foreign policy establishment knows very well. So it's strange to me that we continue with these failed policies that only seem to exacerbate our problems. But as we see in Syria, we use them as a bludgeon as well, because the radical groups that are involved there, the Free Syrian Army, is Al-Qaeda in Syria by all measures. Al-Nusra was a group that we were directly arming. We were giving them tow missiles and things, and also firearms that obviously would end up not only in the hands of other AQ members in other war theaters and insurgencies, but were also sold to ISIS because, of course, if they have an excess of guns, they're going to need capital for other provisions, food and clothes and things like that. So they would sell the guns to even groups like ISIS, who, it's weird, AQ and ISIS are fighting for territory in Syria as well, or at least were previously, but yet they engaged in some sort of trade with weapons as well. God, it's just so strange the more you learn about it. And I'm still confused by all this, folks. I mean, by no means am I an expert, but this is just like a casual observer. Like, I'm an HVAC guy. That's what I do for a living. And I read a lot about these problems, and I listen to a lot of media to stay informed about it. And I'm no expert again, but I certainly don't know enough about these places to go there and start overthrowing dictators and knowing what's best for the region, because I don't. All I do know is that we are not helping. I cannot stress that enough. So the attack that happened in August of 2013 was an alleged sarin gas attack in Ghouta. Now, it is dubious, the claims that are made, and even still, like I said, even James Clapper, who is not necessarily the most honest person that we know from the Snowden revelations and his testimonies to Congress, but even he was trying to back Obama down from the claims about this Syrian gas attack. And just to run over it one more time, we now know in the future that it was actually quite the opposite, that the rebels were using gas in order to kill their enemies in the Assad regime. So, with that, Seymour Hersh has exposed this before himself. Right around 2013, he published this article related to AQ being able to actually get sarin. So that's in the London Review of Books. I will have a link to that in the show notes, of course. There will be a plethora of links in there. And I urge everyone to check out Immersion News. Our friend over at Foreign Policy Focus, Kyle Anslone, does just great work there. And yet a strange coincidence about all of this is just the year prior, in December of 2012, it is now revealed that Hillary Clinton had been talking quite a bit about why we need to overthrow Assad in Syria, and it was a way to check the power of Iran. So this is where they're supposed to start hedging against Iran in this whole thing. Like I talked about, excuse me, there was quite a bit of convoluted ways that they try to check the power of each of these proxy forces over there, and that's a lot of what this is. To me, it's like the Cold War never ended, and especially in the Middle East, they are still doing the same kind of proxy war things for control of commodities and trade routes and things like that, such as oil and just the ability to have control of markets over there. So anyway, this has been made known by the WikiLeaks dump that came out in 2015, and it's quite revealing. You'll have links to that, of course, in the show notes for today's episode. And, these things are, going back to the chemical attacks, these are used as the precedent for why we need to intervene, because Assad is just going to keep using these if we don't make them know that it's wrong to do or something. But it just, every one of the alleged claims just falls apart under its own weight. And we even had James Mattis, who's usually the adult in the room, come right out and say that, we have conclusive evidence that Assad was the one who did this and so. And you just got to wonder, you just have to have in the back of your head, if everyone's just sort of playing ball in this sort of political theater and as, just a way of toying with lives for political gamesmanship. It's just disturbing to think about, But we should also talk about the 2017 allegations, which happened in Khan Sheikhoun in April of last year, almost to the day, in fact. And it turned out afterwards that we learned the shell casing that was in the middle of the road supposedly had gone through rebel hands and then back into Turkey for testing. So at no point were any of the materials for this investigation sort of given a reasonable chain of custody for neutral parties. So it's really hard to point to any evidence from that investigation as some sort of proof. And in fact, our own Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, said that there was no precedent or proof of Assad using gas on his own people all but a month ago. So it sort of perplexes me that even he is so quick to do this. And I don't know, I think perhaps he has a role to play in keeping the escalation down just to this targeted strike or whatever, but still the things that he's conceding are pretty dangerous as far as maybe even not just the short term, but the long term stability of geopolitical relations with particularly Russia. I mean, that's what a lot of this comes down to as far as my huge worries about this, because that kind of thing, that could end extremely disastrously. And it's, one country getting destroyed, God, that just tears my heart up, and that's why I'm so anti-war. But, the entire world, that's even a step above that. So I just can't help but worry about that just slightly more than the rest of this whole issue. And I can't help but think that the intelligence community knows very well that these allegations are not necessarily credible, but they just sort of let it happen and let the narrative spin the way that it's supposed to, especially now in regards to the Trump administration. Always sort of putting him on the ropes to make him prove that he's not a Russian puppet. And isn't it strange that when Trump got elected, as soon as they knew that Trump was getting elected, America pulled back quite a bit, and it was sort of not announced very much. But it was almost like they were backing down from their plan to ramp things up when Hillary Clinton got in. So, being as the passing of the torch was going to be a little bit tenuous, they sort of backed off a little bit. So, yeah, you can see all of the dots sort of connecting here, right? And it sort of makes me feel like this conspiracy theorist type, but really the folks on the mainstream media and who really hold most people's attention with this aren't being very analytical about the whole situation, nor being honest and truthful about exactly what is going on. So here we are in April 2018, and we just struck Syria last night. Looked like a lot of their missile defense systems, the Russian missile defense systems, were stopping some of the missiles. I saw some reports that some great number of them were intercepted. So I guess, take it for what it's worth. And I believe I mentioned this earlier, but yes, this could just be a symbolic attack. But if you also listen to what I'm trying to say, is this is just one more step in escalations with Russia and China in some sort of way, because Syria also has dealings with China. And of course, we all know about the tariff or a trade war that's pending with China, likely going to happen, especially with talks about them going to their own petrocurrency and things like that. Just also complicated with that whole mess. And I don't know as much about it as I probably should. And it's just so frustrating to be in a position to be contrary to what this narrative is spun sort of in the mainstream, which is, if you take a position that, hey, perhaps this isn't exactly the truth and that maybe this misinformation is actually coming from Al-Qaeda. Of course, as we know, the White Helmets being very closely linked to AQ and the Free Syrian Army in Syria is a pretty well-known propaganda outlet, and it is a major primary source for the media that we consume through Reuters and BBC and things like that. And even to that point, the BBC had a documentary about some of the rebels in Syria, calling them freedom fighters just, some years back. And it turns out, that these people are head-chopping lunatics who, they're jihadists. They're AQ in Syria. So I fear that people are being duped by Al-Qaeda and they're none the wiser. It's just really hard to see. And of course it's worth mentioning that if it is true that this is just propaganda pushed by Al-Qaeda, then this is just, and I've seen it described this way and I posted this online, that this sets a precedent for the jihadists that all they have to do is make a convincing claim of chemical weapons attacks and the West will come as if it was a bat signal put up in the air and act as their air force and drop missiles on their enemies in the Assad regime. So just to sort of leave you with that point, I'm going to keep this one short. I hope that I have thoroughly explained this issue. And, if I have any listeners that want anything cleared up, just give me some topics and some questions, and I'll have some people on who know a lot more than me. As you can tell, I read about this stuff and I pay attention, and I know, more than the average person, obviously, but certainly not to the level that some of my friends, Will Porter and Kyle Anzalone, have. I actually do have an unreleased episode that I had with Will a while back on Yemen that I just didn't feel good enough about releasing. And I've been meaning to get him back on just to talk about things that are going on. But yeah, just respond to this episode. Tell me what you think. Give me some good things that you want clarified that perhaps I talked about today but didn't go in depth with. Those guys are really good, and I'm going to have them on soon to talk about all this. So until next time, please just go out there and read for yourself what's going on. have a little bit more of a skeptical eye, I suppose, don't even take my word for it. Look into it, because I think in that case, if you do that, you may come away even more cynical than I am, because I'm trying to be as charitable as I can about this. But once you sort of peel back the onion, you notice just how ugly things are underneath all of this. But as a parting thought, I would like to express a message of peace, if I could. I think that at this moment, it's really easy for all of us, I mean, myself included. This is one of my big issues, and I've been doing a lot of, like I said at the beginning, misdirection of my energy, focusing on arguing with people online who I don't think really want to come to the conversation honestly. They just want to morally preen and take this high ground, because it's taking an unpopular opinion to not call for some drastic measure when we see some horrible crime like the use of chemical weapons. I think that it's worth noting that a lot of people are being very skeptical of this whole thing. I mean, even people who are kind of red, white, and blue, America first kind of people that I know within my own family are kind of like, yeah, this is not right. This is just way too much. And I think for a lot of people who actually are just normal folks, they don't want to see their sons or daughters get sent off to war or anything like that. So common people seem to almost understand the cost of war more than the people who are looking at the books and seeing and parsing out the costs and benefit to them when they don't actually have any collateral in this game. And it sucks even more to think about the people that are becoming the most victims to this, that just the people in the Middle East who are innocent and caught in all of this, who just by circumstance happen to be born in this country, whichever it is. And it's kind of great. I've had at least one person reach out to me who took me up on an offer that I made on social media to clarify any issues that they had or any questions that they had about what was going on. And really, I just kind of gave him a lot of the same information that I gave here in this sort of ranty episode that I'm about to post. But yeah, I mean, just going back to how the power nexus works there in the Middle East and Northeast Africa, and just sort of the context for what's going on and why we should be skeptical. So that's really great, and I think it's worthy of being optimistic about finding some people who really don't agree with what's going on with these nation-building wars that just cost so much blood and money. So yeah, I urge you guys to talk about these issues and talk about it honestly with your friends and family. And hopefully we can put pressure on the powers that be. I know it just sounds so terrible and like grovelly to think about it this way, but I mean, how much power do we really have other than just to speak truth to power? When you don't have it, the truth becomes its own power. So you really do just have to take back the power by embracing the truth and at least striving for it, because maybe I don't have my story right here, but I want to get down to the bottom of it, and I'm not willing to just take, whatever the whims of, these despots, even in our own military and leadership, who think that they know the best way to police the world. And it's times like this that I urge people just to have a little bit higher threshold for bullshit. And on that note, I'm going to sign off. I'm going to leave you guys alone so you can get back to whatever you were doing. Yeah, take it easy, and you'll see me more soon, hopefully. I'm feeling a lot better. I was going through pretty terrible illness, and I still am struggling with it. But I'm starting to get some more energy and mental focus back that I can devote to doing this show. So please stay subscribed. Share this show with someone who might not know about Syria, who maybe wants to listen to a guy rant who knows a little bit of something, at least enough to make you think about it. So yeah, subversionwebcast.com, and check out libertarianunion.com. A lot of really great shows. A lot of guys that are really informed and passionate like I am in the same sort of realm of libertarianism, hardcore voluntarism type guys. So yeah, check it out. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe on your way out and find us on Facebook at facebook.com/subversionwebcast.
In the early days of the internet, radical libertarians were scattered, lonely, and faceless. Without direction, they resigned to scour the web, sifting through content providers in a wasteland plagued by YouTube demonetization, Facebook jail, and covert internet censorship. But then, in 2017, the Libertarian Union was formed. Finally, the average Joe libertarian could find a thriving community of independent podcasters and content providers, all in one convenient location. At Libertarian Union, we'll always have the latest news, interviews, discussions, and even movie reviews. With hundreds of episodes and more added all the time, you'll always find something fresh at libertarianunion.com.